Hi, in a post-apocalyptic hellscape, you can just call yourself Princess. Who's gonna challenge you? Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. On today's MIA 80s Ladies, we're gonna be looking at, let's call it a franchise that didn't have any toys associated with this cartoon back in the 1980s. However, it's during a very interesting period of the 80s, as well as sort of another later period in the early 2000s that we'll get to. In either case, it's not just one female character, it's pretty much the whole kit and caboodle that we didn't get in the 80s. But let's just get right into Thundarr the Barbarian's Princess Ariel. Thundarr the Barbarian ran for two pretty short seasons, from 1981 to 1982. It looks like Hanna-Barbera, but is in fact produced by Ruby Spears. It was created by comic book legend Steve Gerber, with some, assists from other, fellow legends like Jack Kirby and Alex Toth. So it's really, sort of a very comic booky kind of vision made manifest on the screen finally. In the near future of 1994 specifically, a rogue planet sort of passed through our solar system and really did, massive environmental damage to the Earth, and also split the moon in half. Fast forward about 3,000 years, we get to, the era of Thundarr the Barbarian, where there's a lot of, post-apocalyptic wasteland. We see a lot of notable landmarks from, the previous Earth. There's been mutant monsters, mutant civilizations. There's a lot of wizards going around making kingdoms for themselves. And a lot of these are very much like sort of techno wizards. There's a lot of sort of ancient technology being blended with their sorcery. Our main character was, of course, Thundarr the Barbarian, who had a sort of a laser sword and was a former slave, and went on his merry way throughout the kingdoms, discovering again old landmarks, old cities, and fighting for what's right. Alongside him, of course, was his large gorilla, lion, horseman, Ukla, as well as Princess Ariel, the subject of this week's MIA 80s Ladies. She was sort of a young sorceress, someone who was very, very powerful, actually. I mean, she was sort of, kind of seemed a little on the young side, maybe inexperienced, but I mean, she had an insane amount of power. If I were to pit her against the Sorceress of Grayskull, I'd pick Ariel every single time. That said, she wasn't necessarily a Mary Sue. She would become powerless whenever her arms were binded. So it was, let's just say, a little reminiscent of Golden Age Wonder Woman, but I digress. As well as a just smoking bathing suit and gloriously thick hair, she did bring, something else to the table, and that being brains. She was definitely considered the intelligent one of the group, whereas she really had, a lot of understanding. She learned a lot via, reading about old Earth, about how things used to be. So she was very, familiar with these ancient landmarks, with navigating the land. So she definitely was, not only sort of outrageously powerful, but also outrageously smart, and sort of really was, pretty much the one-woman army on this team. If all of this kind of sounds familiar, it's because it kind of is. I mean, this was just after Star Wars absolutely changed the game across the board. So, the comparisons are very easy to spot here. You've got, dude with laser sword, you've got giant walking carpet, you've got sassy princess. So, I mean, this is, the archetypes are dead on. There are shades of He-Man here, and you have to bear in mind that this is sort of, He-Man before He-Man. So, the swords and sorcery mixed with the sci-fi. I mean, I think it was much more prevalent in He-Man, and of course He-Man had a much larger episode count to discover that. But it certainly, was certainly a proto-He-Man in a few ways. The intention with Thundarr was to sell toys. The regulations around, using a cartoon as a toy commercial were, about to get blasted open and make the way for, the big heavies like He-Man, Thundercats, G.I. Joe. However, this was very much, the early days between Star Wars and He-Man. A brief period, but a sort of important one. So they certainly tried to get merchandise out. Really, the only thing they really managed to get out was a Milton Bradley board game. However, when they went to toy companies, this is sort of a bit of an interesting timing plus bad luck was, against them. Originally, Mego, who was, just a juggernaut in the 70s and still really butthurt about skipping on Star Wars, were very quick to pick this up, and they had, made plans to make a Thundarr line, but, and it would have been 3 3/4, again, to sort of compete with Star Wars itself, but for whatever reason, they said, we're going to put all our eggs in a different basket, that being the Love Boat action figures, which to this day is still one of the most legendary lines you've ever heard of. I will note that Mego kind of went bust pretty shortly afterwards, so let's just leave that there. The next company to sort of propose Thundarr was Remco. They had essentially just an ad saying, here's all the lines that are coming in 1981. One of them being Thundarr, but we really don't have any information on what scale. I mean, it was sort of presumed to be He-Man scale to compete with that once that actually did come out, but really unsure. We don't really have a lot of information about it, and thankfully so. Remco, I mean, they kind of suck. I don't talk about them here often, and there's good reason for that. Nevertheless, by the time 1981 rolled around, I mean, Thundarr was on the way out. The ratings weren't great. NBC was really more interested in doing it, syndicated runs of it, in reruns. And He-Man was right around the corner, as was G.I. Joe, as was Transformers, the big three. So, they were about to create the mold on how to launch a cartoon and a toy line and lunchboxes and a Milton Bradley board game and bed sheets, all of it. They were really going to, sort of set the tone for the 80s, and frankly, even today. On top of that, I know I look young and tight, but I was there at the time, and, I like Thundarr. There were many episodes, but it was great. It was really, colorful. The characters popped. It was very fun. And again, it was very Star Wars coded, so I certainly responded to it. But I mean, even at that time, I vividly remember, if you saw a cartoon, it didn't necessarily follow that there would be an action figure line. You hoped there would be. You'd be surprised if you saw it in the toy store, but it wasn't a guarantee. So it's that thing where, they were kind of plagued by bad luck, short life, and some bigger dogs coming down the pipeline to just gobble up all the attention. So really unfortunate, but how have they fared since? I've spoken before in this series about what I call the dark times, being, between the big three and Ninja Turtles, that sort of brief period in the 80s, which as a kid, because of your perspective of time, was an enormous amount of time, where aside from maybe, Ghostbusters, Thundercats, there was a lot of things vying for your attention and not really succeeding. The other dark times, which I've never really discussed before, is really, I would say, the early aughts, the early 2000s, right up until 2010, where a lot of companies were certainly trying to make things, nostalgia bait kind of thing. They did a 2000X He-Man line. G.I. Joe did a really crappy Valor vs. Venom line. Transformers, of course, kept on trucking along, but wasn't really, into the weeds of G1 as it is now. So there was that period of time where we didn't really get a lot of, the toys that we enjoy now. We didn't get a lot of the IP, the franchises, the characters that we want to see. Frankly, there's still a few we'd like to see now, but then especially, there was nothing. It was a wasteland, and what we really did get was strange one-offs, like, Mini-Mates or I-Men or that kind of thing. So, a strange time, nevertheless. This is a bit of a good news, bad news thing here. So in 2003, Toyami, which was one of the, kind of bigger adult collectible toy, makers at the time, had done the aforementioned I-Men, Thundarr the Barbarian figures, and then proceeded to do actual full-scale, large figures of our three main cast, including Princess Ariel. They're great. They look great. They've not aged spectacularly well, let's just be honest here. The articulation is certainly of its time. It's very in that kind of early DC Direct kind of thing, where it's like very much sculpt over function. But nevertheless, I mean, these are gorgeous figures, and I think still very much hold up today. That said, if you're a fan, if you want this, you will pay. They were not made in huge numbers. They are incredibly rare. They go for an enormous amount on the aftermarket. So, I mean, if you're just a die-hard Thundarr fan, I mean, sound off and just go in on it. But just be warned. This is all you've gotten. This is all you're probably gonna get, to be honest. Nevertheless, I mean, despite not being Star Wars nor He-Man nor that big, it's still a great little line. And I mean, even if you just got the three main characters, a handful of villains, even. Very handsome little collection. Would be a fun little thing to revisit. So I always have hopes that some of these smaller companies will go in and do it. Currently, it's owned by Warner Brothers, so they're a little iffy when it comes to releasing, IP, especially one this obscure. They've only really released one DVD set to date, so I mean, they're not really, in the Thundarr market. But again, some up-and-comer could go in and swoop that, get that license. So, I mean, fingers crossed. Nevertheless, there are options, which I love to report. So, if you're a fan of Ariel, if you're a fan of Thundarr, if you're a fan of Big Ookla, who isn't? Give it a shot. And with all that said, I want to thank you for watching, for liking, for subscribing, all those YouTubey things. And I will see you next time on MIA 80s Ladies.